Every year, the major aerospace and defense industry players congregate in France for the Paris Air Show. The event showcases the latest innovations, often sees big product and sales announcements. Well, our guest today was at the show this year, joins us now with some of the big takeaways. Juliana Faircloth, VP and Director for Portfolio Research at TD Asset Management. Great to have you back on the show, Juliana.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so first off the top, lucky you got to go to Paris last month and check out the air show. Big event, as we were saying. What's the big themes? What was going on there?
Well, it's a huge event, as you said. So the Paris Air Show is a massive, probably the biggest industry event for the aerospace and defense industry. I think over a 5-day period, just outside of Paris, there's like 350,000 to 400,000 people that will attend. So it's investors like myself, suppliers, aircraft manufacturers, customers, politicians, there's military representation, even some tourists will go and kind of check out what's on display. It's a great place for investors to engage with management from different companies, hear about their outlook for the space, latest technologies. Really topical this year, the S&P 500 Aerospace and Defense Index is up 25% year to date, and that compares to the market closer to 7%. So it was a great sort of due diligence initiative to assess the durability of some of that performance and also evaluate some of the risks that might be on the horizon.
When I think of my journalism career every year when the Paris Air Show would roll along, we'd report on it a bit and say, like, Boeing has signed this deal. It all seemed like to be the commercial side. A bit of different flavor this year, I understand.
Absolutely. So in my conversations, it was clear that defense was quite a bit more topical this year compared to prior Paris Air Shows. We're in quite an active conflict environment right now. We've had a lot of announcements like Rearm Europe so far this year, and we were actually just 1 week out from the NATO summit, where generally expectations were sort of filling out for a 5% of GDP NATO spending target, up from the 2%. So defense was much more in focus, and I would say my conversations with companies and with different investors and different management teams really focused around two areas there. One being ramping to that 5%, and what is that really going to look like? And then the other was on new technologies, kind of disruptive technologies, and what's in the outlook from that perspective. So would worthwhile to spend a little time on those.
Yeah, let's jump into that. The disruptive technology, obviously, because I think we've seen, as you said, there's a lot of global conflict out there. We're seeing a different kind of warfare, drones, different kind of technologies. Not what we think about when we think about defense. What was the word there?
Absolutely. So drones were very topical in every meeting. Every company was asked about drones, what this means for their business. Drones have clearly become a huge element in conflicts today. They're relatively low cost, they're pretty flexible, they're effective, they're easy to adapt. We've seen a lot of growth in that space. I would say the message from companies sort of fell into two key areas. One being, this is a key area of growth for the future. There will be increased investment in R&D around drone and anti-drone technologies. I think France has committed to 5 billion euros in research and development spend through 2030 just around drones alone. So it's going to become a big spending category. Interestingly, the other message I would say companies were sharing with investors were drones and anti-drones are, from their perspective, more additive to the addressable defense market and not so much fully replacing some of the traditional technologies that people might be more familiar with, of like fighter jets or ground-based defense systems. There was really a focus on the multi-layer comprehensive defense systems. So we've heard a lot of talk in the US about the Golden Dome and that type of initiative. So there is still quite a relevant place for some of the traditional capabilities that we're sort of used to hearing and seeing about.
Now, obviously, there's a commercial component to the air show as well. The defense stuff sounds fascinating. Did we get all the defense stuff in there before we move to commercial? Or?
Sure. Yeah. I could say a couple things just on ramping. Yeah. I mean, obviously, this is a doubling of defense spend over the next decade. So that's a huge initiative and a huge undertaking. There's an added layer of companies and countries more specifically, focusing on self-reliance. And building up their own domestic capabilities. So one interesting takeaway just from that perspective was the need for partnership and consolidation, particularly across Europe. There's a lot of kind of expertise and scale that is a little bit more locally kind of regionalized. And so something that we'll look for over the next couple of years from a lot of these companies is interesting ways to partner, perhaps some bolt-on M&A to build up expertise and scale so that this ramp can actually happen. So that will be an interesting unlock of growth opportunities for companies going forward.
Fascinating stuff there. And obviously, this is a long-term play on the defense front. So the commercial stuff, did anything happen on the commercial front?
Absolutely, yeah. It wouldn't be a Paris Air Show without a lot of activity on the commercial side. I would say there were kind of three key topics companies talked about on the commercial side, one being the demand environment, two being supply chain, and three being tariffs. So on the demand environment, as you mentioned in the intro, the Paris Air Show often comes with a bunch of order announcements. This year they were a little bit muted relative to 2023, the last Paris Air Show. So Airbus, Boeing, and Embraer collectively announced something like 500 orders. In 2023, that was more like 12, closer to 1,200. So a little bit weaker. I would say maybe a caution that we shouldn't really take that as a demand signal necessarily. Boeing and Airbus, as many know, have record backlogs that they're working on out into the 2030s. So the demand, the commentary around demand was still quite positive despite more muted orders. And then on the aftermarket side, because deliveries have been really slow from Boeing and Airbus coming out of COVID, but travel demand has been really strong. I mean, we were just talking before the show about
all the traveling we've been doing. Lucky us.
The traveling we've been doing and the packed planes and the cost of business class. The travel demand has been really strong. And so you've had very few deliveries, really strong travel demand. So the fleet age is quite elevated and aircraft retirements have been really slow. That's been driving spare parts, repairs, maintenance, overhaul. The aftermarket business for a lot of these companies has been growing in the double digits for a few years. And given the elevated fleet age, even with a ramp up in delivery from Boeing and Airbus, we can still see continued growth from that perspective, just servicing all of these aircraft out there.
Is the supply chain keeping up with all that demand?
So the supply chain has been a huge impediment to deliveries. It's been a very difficult supply chain to ramp back up after coming almost to a halt through COVID. Encouragingly, a lot of the companies spoke about improving supply chain dynamics. So that was a positive to hear. Safran, the French engine manufacturer, commented that their sort of watch list of suppliers has moved down from 15 last year down to 10. So definitely making some headway, and that's something to watch closely as the supply chain kind of eases, deliveries start to move through, and that starts to unlock some nice free cash flow growth for Boeing and Airbus as they're able to deliver planes.
This week, we're back on the tariff watch again, trying to figure out what's going on that front. How much did tariffs enter the conversation at the air show?
Tariffs were very topical in the air show. The aerospace and defense industry is, the supply chain's very global by nature. And many smaller suppliers in the space would perhaps not even survive through a very restrictive trade environment. So it's something that management teams are watching very, very closely. I would say generally they remain hopeful that the industry's trade surplus status might help them out through trade negotiations. But certainly that's a risk on the horizon that everyone's paying close attention to. So perhaps we'll learn a little bit more this week. Perhaps it'll be kicked down the road a little longer, but it's a risk for the space.